let me invite you to turn in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6 will be where we begin, at least in terms of the content tonight. Isaiah chapter 6. Now, before we get there, let's do a little exercise, okay? Let's say you bump into somebody you know at the grocery store, and they say to you, "Where do you go to church?" You say, "We go to Calvary Bible Church," and they ask, "Well, who's the pastor there?" And you say, "Well, the preaching pastor, there's many pastors and elders, but the preaching pastor is a guy named Dom Aquilino." And they go, "Okay, describe him to me." What would you say? Be nice, because we're recording you right now, right? What would you say, Ed?
He's holy.
He's holy. That's wrong, but I appreciate it, right? No, how would you describe me? He's Italian. Yes, I am. One of the elect. Yes. No.
A white middle-aged guy just like me.
I'm white and young, is what he said. White and young. Barely out of my teens. I appreciate that, Carl. Just like you. Just like you, brother.
Preaches the Bible.
All right, he's a guy that preaches the Bible. I hope, right? That's good. What else? Animated, right? I'm a cartoon, is what he's... No, it's good. No. It's good, right? Well, see, the way we describe somebody is what we call their attributes, all right? And tonight, we're just going to touch the surface when it comes to how to describe God. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear about a couple of things. Our best efforts to describe God fall short of what God actually is. So we use human language, and we use human language as far as it can go, but we still struggle to communicate what and who this God is. It's kind of like when you look up into a starry sky and your breath is taken away, and then somebody says to you, "Well, describe that to me." And you do your best. You say, "There's a lot of stars in the sky," but that doesn't really connect with its reality, okay? So before we go any further, two things. One, you notice there's no show and tell on the table today. All right, we got something very, very special for you later. What could it be? We don't know. We'll find out at the end. See, that's how I'm trying to trick you to pay attention to me. But all language about God is what we call accommodated language. Okay, accommodated language. Now, this is really important, and it's also really helpful, okay? It's important because we have to communicate in words that we know. We have to communicate in ways that we can understand. And God himself does that, as we'll see in our notes tonight. But it's also helpful to realize that our best efforts to explain God fall infinitely short. Okay? All right, brothers, are you ready? Isaiah chapter 6. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to one another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who calls out, while the temple was filled with smoke. Then I said, "I am so great, God, let me hear." No, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven." Wow. Friends, we are attempting to understand God. And we're doing our best, and we're holding on for dear life. But to describe the indescribable, to communicate the incommunicable, is something that we cannot do without first standing in awe. So let's look at this passage a little bit. It was in the year of King Uzziah's death. Isaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. And notice these beings, seraphim. Now, for those of you who are curious, seraphim comes from the Hebrew word seraph. Seraphim is plural. And what it means is burning ones. Now, these creatures are not burning in the sense of being punished. They are burning, they are glowing with the reflective glory of the God they get to serve. And they fly around him constantly in this vision. And they have 6 wings. Why? Well, 2 they fly with, right? See, I'm an Italian, I can't help but do this when I say it, right? With 2, they cover their feet. That's a sign of submission. And with 2, they cover their face. Why? Because the God of the Bible dwells in unapproachable light. And even the angels whose job in existence is to fly around them cannot look at him. So we know what Isaiah sees here is an accommodated vision. It's not what God is in his essence, because even angels can't look at him. And they pick one of his attributes and they shout it out. And it's not love, as awesome as love is. It's not even wrath, how fearful wrath may be. It is the Hebrew word kadosh, holy. Now in Hebrew, there is no way to say holier or holiest. There's no comparative or superlative. In Hebrew, you just say it 3 times. So when they say holy, 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 what they are uttering is what we cannot look at is the absolute essence of holiness. Are we not blessed? Angels long to look into these things, the Bible says. And we've gotten to talk about them for 7 weeks. It's pretty great. So, without a doubt, the mightiest thought the mind can entertain is the thought of God. And the weightiest word in any language is its word for God. Now, as you know, I share stories. I collect them to use them in sermon and lesson illustrations. And so you mess with me, I'll smile, but I'll use you later. I guarantee it. I was in seminary one time, and we had a guest preacher in chapel. Now, I'll never forget this particular chapel, because this guy was talking about how just annoying he found pastors to be. And so I was listening, because I knew I would probably fit the bill one day. But what he kept saying was this: when they say the word God, they can't just say God, they say God. Their whole tone of voice changes. How arrogant. And I'm sitting there thinking, this guy's pretty high on himself as well. You know what I mean? It's like, I'll take it if you take it. I'll agree if you agree. We're both pretty arrogant. I'm just better than you. See, that's the way I was a long time ago. I'm not as humble as I am now. Right? But I remember sitting there thinking, should not our tone of voice change when we say the word God? One of the commandments is to not lift the name of God up to emptiness. Not say the name of the Lord in vain. When we approach God, we should be deadly, reverently serious. Or at least as much as we can. So what is God like? What are the attributes of God? Well, an attribute is simply a characteristic of God. Like the way you described me, tall, handsome, young, with a full head of hair. Obviously, your eyes aren't that good, but you know what attributes are, right? An attribute is simply a characteristic of God. And some theologians, like Charles Ryrie, I believe, I saw that book floating around earlier, refers to the attributes as the perfections of God. And I love that, because everything God is perfectly. Okay? He's not a little holy and a little gracious, a little loving and a little wrathful. No, he is perfect in all these things. All right? So I'll use those terms interchangeably. So then it leads us then to this question: is there one attribute that qualifies the rest? Sometimes we hear this, right? Well, people say, well, God is love. That is what he is most specifically. So anything that isn't in the narrative of love is secondary. Let me suggest to you, I think that's totally wrong. What God is, he is infinitely loving, infinitely kadosh, holy. And that's the first one we'll talk about tonight, that God is holy. So what's the holiness of God? What does that mean? Does it just mean good? If we're good, is God just simply better? If we're nice, is God just simply nicer? Well, yeah. But it also means a lot more than that. In your notes, you'll see this. The negative definition is this: God's separateness from all else, and particularly from all evil. The word holy, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, at root means set apart. We get the word sanctified from the Latin word for holy, sancta, right? Something is sanctified when it's set apart for holy purposes. The negative definition is simply this: whatever we are, he is infinitely higher than, infinitely transcendent over. The positive definition is this: it is his quality of absolute virtue and greatness. God was holy even before there was anything to be separated from. And so as A.W. Tozer said in his book, which again, the knowledge of the holy is just an absolute classic. He says, God's holiness is not simply the best we know infinitely bettered. We know nothing like the divine holiness. It stands apart, unique, unapproachable, incomprehensible, and unattainable. The natural man is blind to it. He may fear God's power and admire his wisdom, but his holiness he cannot even imagine. Wow. So getting back to Isaiah chapter 6, I want you to notice verse 3. And one called out. Now, who did they call out to? To the other. These seraphim, these angels, these flying, burning beings. One called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The idea here is that we're hearing that word back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over and over again. And he says the whole earth then is full of his glory. Now verse 4, notice this. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. This is just a great way of saying the things that are created, even this vision itself, struggles to contain this holy God. And notice then how Isaiah responds. Now here's the key. Here's how you know whether somebody has wrestled sufficiently with the God of the Bible. It's all a matter of how they feel about themselves, right? Have you ever seen these guys on TV that talk about how they talk to Jesus while they're shaving in the morning? I cut myself this morning, and I wasn't even talking to Jesus. It would be a bloodbath if I tried to shave while Jesus was standing next to me. But you hear these things from time to time, like Jesus is my homeboy. God is my buddy. Isaiah would never say that. He said this, woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips. Now, a prophet needs his lips. It's the whole gig. You know, I know sometimes you probably pray, Lord, close his lips, right, during the sermon, right? But that's okay. Isaiah knew that there's no way he could communicate this God. So the angel, seraphim itself, used tongs, notice, like he couldn't touch the coal. He used tongs, touched his lips, and said, your sin is covered now. The only way we can approach this God is by the absolute grace of Jesus Christ. The only way we can talk about him is because Jesus Christ cleansed us from our wickedness. Now remember, does anybody remember what Peter said when he met Jesus? Anybody want to tell me? Depart from me, why? For I am a what? For I am a sinful man, O Lord. When you're in the presence of holiness, the natural reaction is fear. Doesn't mean it's scary. It means that holiness is transcendent. Awesome. Now notice Leviticus 11:44. For I am the Lord your God, it says, consecrate yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. Let me ask you a question, guys. Does God ever command us to do things we are unable to do? Careful, it's a trick question. Let's read the verse again. Be holy, for I am holy. In other passages, it's quoted, be holy as I am holy. Can we do that? No. Yet God commands it. This should shut our mouths, crush our hearts, and fill us with joy. God commands us to do what we do not have the ability to do. Then he grants us a limited ability to be able to do it. Then he rewards us as if we did it. God is amazing. So what impact does this have, this holiness? What impact does this have on our question of what is sound doctrine? Well, we have to start here, guys. In fact, we've set up the Bible as authoritative and God as triune to get us to this point. Well, what is God like? Well, as you can tell, I really struggle not to preach these kind of things. I know I'm supposed to be up here very calmly, professorial and stuff. I just can't. I'm not made that way, right? I'm just not made that way. But let me tell you what drives me crazy in all loving ways, all right? It drives me crazy when people call God the man upstairs. It drives me nuts. My pastor senses start tweaking, and I hear King James Version verses in my head, and I start wanting to do some fire and brimstone when I hear people say that. God is not the man upstairs for two reasons. Are you ready? He's not a man, and he's not upstairs, right? And I know what people are saying. They're talking about, they don't, for whatever reason, they don't want to say God, so they go, the big guy. Now, by the way, I hate it when people call him the big guy for two reasons. Are you ready? He's not big, he's omnipresent. And he's not just a guy, he's God. So next time, do me a favor. Next time somebody calls God the man upstairs, just look at him and go, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And then just walk out. You'll do it. I know you'll do it. We've seen it. We've seen it. How we approach God, all right, stepping back from the preacheriness of it, but like I said, sorry, not sorry. How we approach God is the single most important thing in our walk. it dictates everything else. I think many outside of the church are outside of the church simply because they do not get a sense from us that God is that compelling. And so as we chew on this all summer, beloved, my friends, our God might be too small. Let's make much of him because he is huge. Okay. Exodus 15:11. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? Another thing we need to understand, the holiness of God means our God is totally different than any other God. Not that any other God exists, but the concept of any other God. And we know this to be true, right? When was the last time you went into a restaurant and, okay, anybody like Chinese food? I love Chinese food. We like Chinese food? All right, you see Buddha statues all over the place in Chinese food, you know? And it's actually funny. I think they put those in buffet places especially just to dissuade you from eating too much, right? Yeah. Dude's not wearing a shirt, you know? He has duck sauce dripping down his chest, got a big smile on his face, right? That's a different approach to God than Christians have to God, although obviously they don't think Buddha is God, you understand. We approach God differently because he is different. On the Dome of the Rock, I've heard that it said, I'm not absolutely sure, but I've heard that it's written somewhere that Allah is God and God has no sons. That's not the God of the Bible. We don't serve the same God in different ways. We serve different gods. God is holy and separate. So, as A.W. Tozer again once said, holy is the way God is. To be holy, he does not conform to a standard. He is that standard. He is absolutely holy with an infinite, incomprehensible fullness of purity that is incapable of being other than he is. Because he is holy, his attributes are holy. That is, whatever we think of as belonging to God must be thought of as holy. Okay? So the second attribute then we'll talk about is that God is righteous, which is a little bit different than God is holy. Holy talks about the transcendence of his nature. Righteous means that he does conform to the standard of right. Someone is righteous when they do right, when they think rightly, when they act rightly. I think the word in Greek is dikaiosune, if I'm not wrong, righteousness. See, I got to be careful. We have scholars among us who correct me, you know, and it's good. Well, they should. So what is the righteousness of God? It is the quality or attribute of God by virtue of which he does that which is right or in accordance with his own nature, will, and law. Simply put, God always does what's right. Here's a battleground today. You know, a few decades ago, the question was, God could not exist because science has gone so far and this and that. The argument now is God could not exist because if there is a God, why do bad things happen at all? And we need to understand the Bible is clear, and our own experience would lead us to believe that God always does the right thing, even when it doesn't feel like it. Psalm 7:9. Oh, let the evil of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous, for the righteous God tries the hearts and minds. Psalm 48:10. As is your name, O God, so is your praise to the ends of the earth. Your right hand, symbol of power, is full of righteousness. For your righteousness, O God, reaches the heavens. You've done great things, O God. Who is like you? Revelation 16:5. I'm just rattling through these. They're in your notes. And I heard the angel of the waters saying, righteous are you who are and who were, O Holy One, because you judge these things. So what does this mean? If God does what is right, he never does what is what? Wrong. So he never breaks his promises. Romans 3:4. Rather, let God be found true, even though every man be found a liar. That verse says this. Even if every person lies, and we do, God is still true. God will never compromise his nature. God will never play favorites by changing the standard. Romans 2:11, there is no partiality with God. See, here's the thing. Most human beings who believe there is a God but don't love the God of the Bible, they're banking that God's going to change the rules at the last minute. They're hoping that heaven is like Woodstock. Now, I know all of us are way too young. I know I certainly am to remember Woodstock. I was -7 years, I think, when it happened. But do you know what happened at Woodstock? They sold tickets to Woodstock. Do you know this? And just so many people showed up, they just had to let everybody in, or else there was going to be a huge riot of angry hippies, right? Nightmare. Well, that's what, most people think that's what heaven's like. If we all decide we're not going to follow the rules anymore, we think we're just going to be able to storm the gates. It's not going to work that way. God will not change his standard. He sent his Son to keep it. The next attribute that we talk about might be a little scandalous for you. Exodus 20, verse 5. You shall not worship them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Wait a second. Is jealous good or is jealous bad? See, it's a trick question, right? Now, see, now you stopped answering, which I appreciate, that you're scared, but it's all right. Just blurt it out. We'll get it on video and everybody, no. Jealous is bad sometimes. Jealous is great other times. Let me illustrate the difference. If your wife is away on a business trip and you make her hold the phone up so that you can listen to see if you can hear anybody breathe, that's bad jealousy, right? But if you're sitting at home with your wife watching a movie and another man walks in and says, I want your wife, and you go, sounds good to me, that's bad. We should be jealous in a certain sense. The things that are ours, not in a possession sense, but the things that are ours should be protected as ours. I mean, I don't freak out very often about my wife, she doesn't go on business trips, which is great, you know what I mean? But at the same time, if anybody came up to her in church and said, hey, what are you doing on Saturday night? I would make them the sermon illustration every week until they left. I know you wouldn't do that. Because then I'd be like, I can't take any more of this. God is jealous in the best sense. He's jealous because he wants us for himself. He won't share us. His glory he will not give to another. His bride he will not share with another. He loves us. Exodus 34:14, for you shall not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he's holy and a jealous God. Now maybe something to talk about later is this. There is a conundrum here, right? If God is love and love is not jealous, then how can God be jealous and loving at the same time? Maybe we could talk about that during the discussion time. Okay, so the fourth thing that we'll talk about tonight is that God is a spirit. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that he's not a physical being. Even when he takes a physical form, he's not completely physical. Now, Jesus is a physical being. He has blood, flesh, just like we do. But God, in his triune majesty, is not a physical being. He is a spiritual being. Okay? And so what we mean by that is simply that he does not have physical parts. John 4:24, Jesus said to the woman at the well, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. You see his point? The nature of God is that he's not a physical being, so worship of God should not be something primarily physical, like burning animals, right? Or anything else, lighting candles. Worship of a spiritual God should be a spiritual enterprise. Make sense? It should be within us, not without of us or without us. What impact does this have on our question of what sound doctrine is? Well, God does not have a physical form. So let me ask you this. When Moses said to God, I want to see your glory, and he says, I'll show you my back. If God doesn't have a back, what could this possibly be? Accommodated language. That's great, Chris. Good job, man. Everybody, that was Chris Bauerline, all right? All right, good job, good job. It's accommodated language. He's trying to tell us you can't see the full essence of my glory, but I'll cover you and you can see a part of it. That's accommodated language. Okay? An example of how this sets a standard for sound doctrine is Mormons believe that God the Father had a physical form. And they believe that he used that physical form to impregnate Mary. Okay, so that's a big difference than what we're talking about. We believe that Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit spiritually, not physically, right? Although God used physical things, he did not take a physical form, okay? 5, God is unchanging or immutable. What does this mean? Simply that God does not change. Now, again, we do have to be careful with language here, right? James 1:17 says this, every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. I mean, from time to time we hear people say things like this. I don't like the God of the Old Testament, they'll say. The God of the Old Testament is a wrathful, angry God. And let's be honest, there's a lot of stories in the Old Testament where God reacts differently than we would expect in the New Testament. Like the ground opening up and swallowing whole families, things like that. Or people being killed simply because they used the wrong recipe for the incense, things like that. But God is just as angry about sin now as he was then. He doesn't change. His nature, he's not like us. Like, you know, we mellow out as we get older, right? I mean, some of you are still younger and you'll get there, right? But like when you're in your 20s, you know, you just have a different sort of approach, especially as a pastor. I wanted to fight everybody when I was 26. I thought I had all the answers and I was smarter than everybody, and, you know, everything was about controversy. And now I really try to avoid it at least one time out of 10. You know, I'm getting a little better. No. But no, as you grow older, you realize some of these things aren't really hills to die on. Well, they think God's the same way, that he just mellowed out, that he just lost steam. Didn't happen. Won't happen. God hates sin just as much now as he did 3,000 years ago. In Malachi 3:6 it says this, for I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed. I love that verse because we're expecting him to say the opposite, right? We're expecting him to say, I don't change, that's why you will be consumed. But no, he's just as righteous 3,000 years ago and gracious 3,000 years ago as he is now. It's not like God woke up one morning and go, man, I've been very hard on these people. No, he's the same. It's just now we have Jesus. And praise the Lord for that. Numbers 23:19. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. He has said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? The point here is we lie because we're afraid, right? We're afraid of what people could do to us. We're afraid of what people think about us. God doesn't do that. You know, your wife walks into the living room and says, did you eat all the Oreos? And we say, no, I did not, while crumbs fall from our faces. Why? Because we're afraid of her, that's why. Right? Because she can beat us up most of the time. God's not afraid of anybody. There's nobody who can overpower him. There's nobody whose opinion he panders to. He's God. He doesn't have to change because he's never done anything wrong. He's never made a mistake. He's never been inaccurate like I am sometimes. Notice the quote here near the bottom of your page. For a moral being to change, it would be necessary that the change be in one of three directions. He must go from better to worse, which God cannot do, right? He can't get worse. Or he has to go from worse to better. Well, he can't do that because he's never been worse. There's nothing better than God. Or, granted that the moral quality remains stable, he must change within himself as from immature to mature. Well, God's never been immature. Or from one order of being to another. It should be clear that God can move in none of these directions. His perfections forever rule out any such possibility. Number 23 again, A.W. Tozer there. All right, we're getting close to the end of our notes, and then we will discuss, okay? God never realizes he was wrong because he's never wrong. And God never learns new information because he knows everything. Now, there are certain times in the Bible where it says God changed his mind. Like one of the ones, I don't know if I have it in your notes, but remember in Genesis where he says that he was sorry that he made man because they got so sinful. Now, if God can't change, and if God knows everything, and if God's in control of everything as a sovereign God, and he says, I'm sorry I did something, what might that be? Help us out, Chris. Right? Accommodated language. What he's saying is, I feel sorrow over the state of humanity, right? Okay? In Jeremiah 26:13, it says, now therefore amend your ways, your deeds, and obey the voice of the Lord your God, and the Lord will change his mind about the misfortune which he has pronounced against you. It's not meant to be taken like we can force God's hand. What it means is that the circumstances will change if our attitudes change. But he's behind all of that and beyond all of that. Okay? So God doesn't change his mind in that sense, and he doesn't learn something he didn't know before. In Exodus 32, without looking it up, you'll remember that God says, I'm going to destroy Israel, and I'm going to build a whole new Israel on you. And Moses talks him out of it. Right? Well, when you talk God out of something, it's accommodated language. Because otherwise, Moses loves Israel more than God does. Like, it's impossible. Otherwise, God didn't know what he was doing. Impossible. Otherwise, God is having a temper tantrum. Can't happen. So that's why we call this accommodated language. That means he's using what we could call an anthropomorphism. It's the idea that God uses forms of humans to explain human things. Okay? And so talk about that, think about that over the next couple of months. And we will stop right there. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll go from there.